Hello, this is Luke Turner. I'm back with episode 4, I believe this is, of building a web app from scratch. So we're working on this exercise tracker web app. And I believe where we wrapped up last time, we had created a page for users to list their exercises, and they could also create new ones. So before we get started here, I'm actually going to do some README updates. Let's get rid of some of these notes that are not really relevant anymore. And I'm going to add some usage instructions for development purposes to basically remember what all the steps are needed in order to run this locally. So what do we have here? Well, first we need to start the database. Bun run db start. Bun run db start. Then we also need to do bun run client dev. And that's going to start the watcher for recompiling our client-side JavaScript whenever anything changes, rebundling it. And then we're also going to need to run bun run dev, pardon me. So bun run dev. Just so we don't have to remember these steps each time. I'm not going to get too much detail into like how to get started from scratch for now, but this is what we're going to do. So let's actually run these things. Bun run start. Bun run client dev. And then I'm going to make a new tab and I'm going to do bun run dev. And now we should be able to, let's give this some time to see if it works. There we go. We should be able to go to localhost 3000 and see the app. Yep. And we're already signed in. Just as a reminder, this is using GitHub OAuth sign in. So I'm signed in on GitHub, and all I have to do is click this sign in with GitHub button. I've already granted it permissions. If you were to click this for the first time, you would need to grant this app access to some, like your email for your GitHub profile. But having already done that, all I have to do is click this button and I get signed in. And I can go to manage exercises and I can see the list of exercises that I've created for this user. Now, as you can see here, this page is pretty simplistic. You can add a new exercise, but you can't actually manage or delete any of the exercises on the list. And we could try to introduce some JavaScript or some way of making this page kind of dynamic where you could, say, edit the name of an exercise in place. Like a lot of times if you're using an app, they'll have like a little pencil button that you can click and then like change the value. It replaces the static text of the value with like an input, and then you can edit the input and then you can submit that. And that is perfectly fine. But if we think about kind of the long-term usage of this application, people are probably going to want to have a specific page for each exercise. Like, to use my example, say you have an exercise called pull-ups. People are going to want to not just edit the name, but edit other metadata about that exercise. Maybe see when it was created, maybe see the history of when that exercise has been performed, maybe see some graphs for it. Basically, they want a page specifically for that exercise with some information about it. And that's also where we're going to put the editing and deleting functionality for that exercise in that special page. So let's actually go ahead and create a new page for viewing a single exercise. So for starters here, we're going to need to create a new route. And I'm just going to copy this get/exercises. As we can see here, we have a get exercises, which is basically listing all of your exercises. We have a post exercises, which is used to create a new one. And now we're going to do like a get exercises /ID. And that's going to get a specific exercise by ID. Okay, so in order to do this, we need to figure out what exercise we want to load. So we need to find what the user has put into this ID parameter. And I believe we can do that with something like this. ID equals rec.params.id. And then if we do console.log ID, we should be able to save that. And if we go over here, /123, we can see that the ID 123 is put in here. So this is the express routing logic or whatever, basically saying, okay, this parameter or this segment of the path is a parameter because it starts with a colon, and Express will take whatever value is in that and put it in the rec.params.id object for us automatically. And so now what we need to do is look up that exercise. So we're going to say we want to select from exercises table. This part we can keep. And we want to select where the ID is exercises table.id is ID. And so this isn't happy with the wheres, double wheres. So how do I have multiple things in a where? I wonder. And, okay, so I need to use kind of like a wrapping Boolean logic function. So in this case, we're saying, let's get TypeScript happy here. In this case, we're saying we want to find an exercise. Can you not? And does that work? Yeah. So basically, exercise. What we're looking up here is an exercise where the ID matches the ID parameter, and also the exercise user matches our logged in user's ID. So I shouldn't be able to, as a user, actually look up an exercise that doesn't belong to me, which is why we need this and. Now, it does seem not very happy with this. And equals car, and I wonder why not. What are you not happy about? The possibility that ID is null? No. Argument of type string is not assignable to parameter of type number. So I believe this is saying that maybe the ID column is expecting a string, or is expecting a number, whereas this ID value is a string. So just out of curiosity, if I do a parse int ID 10, okay, that fixes there. The ID of this table, if we actually look at the schema here, yeah, so the ID here is declared as an integer, which, you know, there's potentially security concerns with that in terms of enumerating exercises, but because, you know, we're making sure to only allow the user to view exercises that they're actually authorized to view, shouldn't really be a problem. But sometimes you can have the ID be something that's not an auto-incrementing integer like a UUID v4 or even a UUID v7. But we didn't actually do that, and we don't really need to worry about it. But if this was a serious app, like if this was like something I was building for a SaaS or something, I would probably try to avoid these auto-incrementing integer IDs. I've also seen problems in the past where it's like you have an incrementing integer ID and eventually it starts to overflow, your 32-bit integer, and you end up like overwriting either your old rows in that table or causing some other types of problems that can be a big mess. So anyway, I think this should be good here. And we're going to not render the exercises view. We're going to render a different view, which is going to be for a singular exercise. And the title here, we're actually going to put the exercise name in the title. And maybe that's all we really need to put in the title. But I'm going to do exercise.name. Oh, and so this is selecting an array, which is not really what we want. I wonder, the simplest way to deal with that is to just do this. And here we could do a question mark dot. So what this is saying is that if this is for some reason undefined, this is going to return undefined instead of throwing an error. And then we can say like if not exercise, throw new error, could not find exercise. So now if I were to go to say exercise 1, 2, 3 again, I should be getting an error. And I'm not exactly sure how these errors are actually going to get handled. It'll be interesting to see that. Okay, so we just get an error. And then you'll notice that here it's just spinning, which is kind of showing that we don't have a default error handler on this router. And so I'm actually just going to add that now. So if I do I think something like app.use, and then it would be like rec res next error, I believe. And then this would be res, and let's do these. So this is like rec is request with session, res is response, next is the next function, and error is something. Let's just say it's an instance of error. And so then here, we can do a quick log so we can see what's going on, and then we can do res.send status. Might as well just do a 500 for now. Let's do res.status 500.send error. Let's just see what this does. So now if I go here, is it going to do anything? No, it's not calling this error middleware. So let's actually check out the Express docs here. Basically what we're trying to do is define a default error handling middleware. And that is going to allow us to do things like throwing an error in the middle of processing and having that be handled by actually returning an HTTP response. And if I recall, yeah, this default error handler business, error, so error is the first one, not the last one, for starters. Where did that even go? Over here. Error goes here. And I will copy this from what Express has to say. I'll just call it error. So this is kind of what's confusing me though, is like this built-in error handling should be catching this error by itself. So I'm not sure exactly why I would need a separate error handler in the first place. This is also complaining about some other things here. Are those new? Let's try again here. See what we have to say. If we do it again. So it's throwing the error. So part of me is wondering if there's an issue here with the fact that this is an async function as opposed to using the actual next thing. Do we have some information about this up here? Not a huge fan of that. Kind of what I'm seeing is like, there's not. So let's try something here. And kind of as a point of interest, the reason that I'm trying to figure this out is because I could just do res dot, instead of throwing an error here, I could do something like res dot send status 404. And this would work just fine. But you could also imagine, say the database isn't connecting for some reason, and then this is going to throw an error. And that's not really something that I can easily control. I can put this whole thing in a try catch, but I don't exactly want to have to do that for every single router. If I could just throw within the router and then have it return something, that would be the best. But let's actually get rid of this. And then try something a little different here. If I put in a new parameter here, which is next, and then if I call, like if I do return next new error cannot. find exercise. What is this going to do now? Let's see. Okay, so here we kind of see what I was expecting a little bit more. This is the Express default error handling. The fact that I have to do it this way is a bit annoying now. Seems like a limitation where Express doesn't automatically detect that the controller method is returning a promise, basically. And if it is returning a promise, to notice that, oh, that promise had rejected, and so I should treat that as an error case. Instead, I kind of have to do that manually. So let's not actually worry about that for the moment. Just going to return a 404. The other nice thing about this 404 is that this is actually sort of the correct thing to return if the exercise doesn't exist. You know, if we're thinking about this sort of in a RESTful API sense, if the user tries to browse to a page where the exercise doesn't exist, then it's going to return not found. If I try to go to like exercise 1, also not found. Let's see if I go to the list of all exercises here. Let's actually update this page to give us some links to the exercise specific pages instead of just listing the names. So like here I would do li ref / exercises / something, and then that's going to be exercise name. And then this is going to be, I don't really know how to do this in Pug, but it would be like plus exercise.id. Does that work? If we refresh the page, we've got these links. And you can see kind of down in the bottom left corner the URLs that it's using. So like here, if I go exercises 4, now we're actually getting a different error. And this makes sense because it's gotten through this part and now it's trying to render the exercise view, but we haven't actually created the exercise view yet. So let's do that now. Views. I'm just going to copy this one so we can get the template declaration and everything already there. And then this would be like exercise. Let's actually make this just the exercise.name. And then, you know, we don't really have a lot that we would be putting in this page quite yet. One thing we do want to have is the ability to delete that exercise. So this would be like action / exercise / plus exercise.name or ID, method delete. Don't need that. And then this would be delete. So like if we do this, say, and refresh the page, now we actually have this page and there's a delete button that the user can use to delete their exercise once we actually implement it on the back end, of course. What happens if a user tries to click it? Let's look in our network tab here. Delete. So here it's doing a get, which I'm not a huge fan of. Let me see here. I wonder if forms can't even do the delete method. Yeah, post get dialog. Okay. So suppose I want to delete something. I can't really actually use the delete HTTP method if I'm using a form. So what I can do is have it be something like a post. Maybe there's a better way to do this. I don't really know. Post, and then we can add like a /delete to the route. So now if we try to delete it, we get a, oh, I forgot to refresh the page. Also, there should be exercises with an S. Refresh the page, delete. So now it's doing this route as a post. And it could be a get, but you know, for something like this, a post is better because it shows that it's actually performing an action on the back end. And that, you know, it shouldn't necessarily be retried. Although in this case, deleting a single exercise is what you would consider an idempotent call. So if the user makes that request twice in a row, it's not going to, like the end result in the database is going to be exactly the same as if they made it just once. Because you can't delete the same exercise twice. But in any case, what we want to do now is make a new route. And this one is going to be something like, let's just copy this. And eventually we're going to need to build in some better abstractions here, but I'm not worried about that quite yet. We're still trying to understand exactly where our code is duplicated and what we want to abstract away in order to figure out where those abstractions are actually going to give benefit versus just being a nuisance to deal with as we're iterating on the app. So this is /delete, and this is going to be a post. And then here, you know, I think we could just basically replace this with a delete. Okay, it's not really liking that. So it doesn't need the from. And then this doesn't make sense because the delete doesn't return anything really. Don't even need the parentheses. And in fact, we don't even really need that. So what is this actually going to return? Query result never. It could in theory return like a number, the number of rows deleted, but we don't really need that information anyway. So we're just going to do this, do that. And then just like we've done up here, we're going to redirect the user back to their page to list all of the exercises. So an interesting thing here with that, so let's go back here, refresh the page. Suppose somebody clicks this delete button. It's going to perform the action, but we're not going to want to redirect the user back to this page because this exercise we just deleted. They would get a 404. So instead, it's going to redirect the user back to the exercise list page just as a kind of, you know, to send them to a page that sort of makes sense. So try deleting this, see what happens. It was deleted. Let's delete these other foo-bars here just to get them out of the list. And we can see that each one we delete, it's going away. Very nice. Let's get rid of this commented code as well. We don't need that. And we don't need these nexts for now, anyway. Ultimately, we'll need to figure out something to do with that. And so we also don't need this type here either. Okay, let's start committing some of this stuff. So here we're adding, oh yeah, we can also get rid of these console.logs. Don't need that. Adding page to view single exercise and delete it. Sure. Okay. Oh, and I'll commit this on the README, add usage instructions to the README. Sweet. Okay, so now we have the ability to create and delete our exercises. We don't have the ability to rename them at all though. And that's something that I'm going to go ahead and add now as well. Because we have this page already with this form, we can basically use the same type of thing right here. So let's do this, update, and this is going to be plus exercise.id. And basically what this is doing now is if we do a post to the exercise route without the /delete flag, then we'll be able to update that name. And so here we can, once again, just kind of copy this. And this is going to be a post to /exercises/id. And here we're going to update. So how is the syntax for that? Update exercises table. And then we're going to need some kind of value dot set, looks like. Dot set name. And then the name is going to be basically this. And here's a good example where it's like we're throwing this error. And really, that's not going to work, apparently. We should be doing like return res dot status 400 dot send must specify a name. And I'll do the same up here just for correctness. And then this is going to be rec.body.name. And then again here, we don't need that. We're not actually returning the updated exercise here at all because that's not actually going to be needed. All we're going to be doing here is redirecting. And in this case, see down here, we redirect to exercises page because we deleted the exercise. But here we're just updating it. So we actually want to redirect it to, there we go. I thought that indentation was a little wrong. To /exercises/id. So let's go back over here and try this out. If we open up the new exercise, we can update the name, click update, and did we, what happened here? So this, oh, I see. So this is not right. I forgot a slash here. Let's try again. Update. And we've updated the exercise's name. And if we go back to the list, we can see that it's been updated here as well. Okay. You know, this is pretty simple, pretty standard stuff. There's like a term CRUD, C-R-U-D, create, read, update, delete, which are basically the common actions that you're going to need to allow users to perform when they're managing their data in your app. Not necessarily always. Sometimes, for instance, if the data is immutable, the user can just create, read, delete, but they can't update, or sometimes they can't delete it either. Sometimes they can only update, whatever. But in this case, we have all four of those things now. You can create a new exercise. You can read, which is to say view the settings for that exercise. Currently, the only setting is the name. You can update that setting, and you can also delete that exercise altogether. And then there's also a final kind of thing, which is the ability to list all of the exercises. You could call it CRUD L or something. And we can do that for all of these. So that's, when you're thinking about managing something, that's kind of like the main thing that management page is going to encompass handling. So in a sense, this manage exercises page is pretty much done, and we can start working on other parts of the app for now. Like for instance, in the today page, if people wanted to add new workouts or new sets, they'll be able to create and manage the exercises that they want to put into those sets because we built out that part of the app already. So at this point, let me actually add this as well. Add ability to update exercise names. Okay. So here, this is a point where we can start to think about what specifically we want to work on next. One of the things that you could do is abstract some of these functions into some reusable functions. Build what's sometimes called a model layer, where instead of your controllers interacting directly with the SQL in the database, your controllers are going to be interacting with some function that encapsulates the idea of updating an exercise. But currently for each of these controllers, like if we look at, all of the controllers that we've created, the SQL queries in each one is basically unique. We don't have, like this one is looking up a single exercise. This one is looking up all the exercises. This one is updating a single exercise. This one is deleting, and so on. And so far, we've never had the need to say, get the exercise, a single one, except in this particular controller. So again, we could start to try to abstract this out, but it feels a little bit early for that to me. Another thing that we could consider doing is start to improve the UI a little bit. Because obviously what we have now is not something that we're going to want to, it's not an experience that our users are going to appreciate. The UI doesn't have any styles. It's not always clear what exactly is what. And this doesn't have a label and so on. There's a lot of things like that we could fix, but I want to hold off on fixing that until we actually import a CSS framework so that we don't end up having to basically do all that now and implement a decent looking page and then basically take out a lot of that and replace it with whatever our CSS framework uses. So instead, the other thing that we could consider doing is actually pulling in a CSS framework. And I kind of want to do that. And I kind of want to use Bulma just because I've had good experiences with it in the past. So when you're picking a CSS framework, there's a few things to consider. One of them is that a lot of these frameworks are dependent on a certain type of stack. An example being if you're using Tailwind CSS, let me open up a thing for that. Tailwind CSS. This isn't a framework, really. It's a utility class. I guess it is a framework because this says it is right here. But it's not a framework that focuses on exposing components that are useful out of the box. Instead, it just exposes a lot of these utility classes that you can use to build your own components. And it has a lot of functionality in there to allow you to build abstractions on top of these utility classes. It's really quite complicated and powerful. But there are also actual frameworks that are built on top of Tailwind, like the official Tailwind one, but there's others as well, where they do expose these out-of-the-box components that work well. But of course, in order to have these and to use these frameworks, you need to have Tailwind be part of your stack. And Tailwind actually involves a compilation step. And we don't necessarily hate that, but we don't necessarily want to include that either. So for now, we're just going to rule out anything that requires Tailwind or anything that requires a post-CSS compilation step or uses Sass, etc. It's okay if the framework uses Sass under the hood as long as it's distributed as plain CSS. Another thing to keep in mind, like one framework that I really like to use if I'm using React is React Spectrum. And there's a really powerful thing about using, I don't know what you would call this, a React-aware framework or a framework that is not just CSS, but also has JavaScript logic built into the components, because they can have a lot more powerful and easy to use components. It's basically a much better abstraction interface than if you're just exposing CSS. Like an example, something like this action menu. This is really easy to actually create this like drop-down menu, and you don't have to think about how the JavaScript is implemented. You don't have to think about what the classes that are being used under the hood or how many elements are actually involved in this. Instead, you get to interact with this high-level React interface, which is really nice to use. But because we're not using React, we kind of can't use this type of JavaScript included component-based thing. Bulma, on the other hand, is an example of a framework where it's basically CSS only. And like if we go to download here, let's see what it has to say for itself. Okay, it just downloaded a zip file. We open that up in my other monitor here. We've got some things. So let's, in our public directory here, this is where we're putting our static assets. I'm going to move these hello? I'm going to move these. I don't know why that's not working. One sec. Let me reveal in File Explorer. I have my File Explorer windows on my other monitor here, so you can't see what I'm doing at the moment, but I'm putting these Bulma files in there. Okay. We've got those up now. So, you know, if we actually look at these things, there's a CSS file, there's a map, and there's a minimized or minified CSS file. In theory, you know, we really, like I'm going to include these others in case we want them, but I think we can just use this min.css and that shouldn't be a problem. So let's actually add this to our layout. This would be like a link CSS. And then the source is going to be just /Bulma /min or .min.css. And if we do that, then when we refresh this page with the network tab open, we can see that that CSS file is being loaded here. And yeah, we can see the response. Took it a minute to load, but you know, this is a big file. We're definitely not going to need all of this functionality. One of the nice things about some CSS frameworks is they give you the ability to select only the components that you're actually using in your app to minimize the size of the CSS file that you're including. So you're not including CSS for things that you're never going to use. Maybe in the long term, if we're trying to improve the performance of this app, the first page load performance, we could figure out a way to do that. But especially in development, when you don't actually know what components you're going to have in your app, it's really just a pain. And it's better to just import the whole file and, have it be a little bit inefficient. Anyway, so let's actually start. Let's just go ahead and add these and say add Bulma. And then let's start using it. So one of the things that I want to use Bulma for is the nav bar. I talked about this a little bit in one of my other videos. We have this bar at the top. Okay, this is interesting. You can see as well, this page immediately looks quite a bit different from how it did before. Just by including this bulma.min.css. Like our list is missing the dots, our default font has changed, the default color for the links has changed, the sign out button for some reason doesn't look like a button anymore. These are styles Bulma is applying. They could be called like normalization styles or something like that, where it's basically trying to standardize the appearance of the content across all browsers, and kind of make it like reset a lot of the default browser settings in order to make it easier for me as a developer to actually create a consistently styled page. But because I don't actually have any other styles, the page actually looked a lot better before when it was using the default browser settings, without the reset. So, it's kind of annoying, but we're going to be restyling all of this stuff anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But it's interesting to notice. Okay, so let's update this nav business here for starters. So a lot of times when you're using a CSS framework, you're basically just copying stuff. So in this case, for our navbar, we're going to need to add this class navbar and put in these comments. And let's just see what that looks like for starters. Okay, so we've got something, but it's not really doing what we want it to do. So now the reason for that is we need to use some of these subclasses to organize things, is how it seems to me. Let's just try this. So if I do like div.navbar brand, exercises, well, let's just start there for now. And then this will be untabbed. Yes. Or exercise tracker, whatever. Let's see what that looks like now. Okay, so we've got the exercise tracker. Looks pretty weird. So it's kind of seeming like this needs to be like a.navbar item. How does that look? Okay, it's doing a little better. And I could really ref equals / today. Seems fine. Or just /. Let's do it that way for now. And so then like this would be navbar item. This would go away. This would be navbar item. I'm kind of just guessing here. Navbar menu. Navbar burger. I don't really want to worry about the burger yet. Navbar brand. Okay, so first we need a navbar menu. And then in that is where we would put this other stuff. And these, well, let's just see what this looks like first. Okay, so we can see if we look at the inspect here. Oh, whoops. This actually all needs to be inside the nav. That would be great. Okay, looking a little better. So here we have a nav, and then it has a brand, and then it has the menu with these 3 buttons in it. And because this is a button, I wonder if I can still just do navbar item here. Does that seem to work? Yeah, works okay. Kind of. Navbar item. Drop down menu. See, a lot of this stuff we don't really need, but when we do need it, it's going to be very nice to have the ability to do it. How do I put something onto the right side? Is that like, where did it talk about the navbar start? Navbar end. Yeah. Are the 2 direct and only children of the navbar menu? Okay, so actually this should be a div.navbar start. And that would be like this. And then there would be a div.navbar end. And this would be if user. Yep. So what does this look like now? Cool. So now we have sign out. We have these buttons. If I click sign out, then I can click sign in. And yeah, seems all right for now. So also on the manage exercises page, let's just experiment with this one a little bit too. So we kind of have to think now about how we want these exercises to be rendered. We have a list of things here. We could render them as cards. We could render them as a table. We could render them as a simple list, like literally an HTML list. There's a variety of options. I think for now, what I'm going to do is go with cards. Something where it's kind of like a simple card. So it would be like div class card, and then header class card header, and then p class card header title. So this is kind of an example of what I like about the React Spectrum is you don't have to do this mess, because all of the different nested components and things like that, or nested elements, are hidden within, say, just like a card component that's going to set this up all for you. But because we're using raw HTML and CSS, we kind of have this leaky abstraction where we have to know card has to have a header called card header, and then that has to have a thing called card header title. We can't just put a prop on the card where it's the title. So having said that, let's just go ahead and do this. So for each exercise, it's not going to be in a UL. We're going to do a card. So it's like a div.card. And then inside that, we're going to have a header.card header. right? Yep. And then inside that, a p.card header title. And I'll just do that for now. And let's see what that looks like. So now we have these cards. Looks pretty weird though. It's definitely not what we actually want it to look like. First, let's put in a card footer as well. So we could do like, I believe, footer.card footer. Yep. And then in here, there would be that. And this would be something like that. And then this would be edit. Let's see what that looks like. Not quite right. Card footer class, card footer. Oh, this needs a card footer item class on the A. Okay, let's see what this looks like now. Yeah, it's looking weird. Looking weird, huh? But we're still making some progress. So now I'm going to need to figure out how to make this not be full width of the page kind of thing. Like I would like these to be in a flex flow or something like that, like a row flex thing. And I could just do that myself. But I feel like there is a way to do that in Bulma as well. Layout? No. Columns? Smart grid? Actually, I kind of like this. We could try this out. So if we do div class grid, okay, it just wants me to do dot grid. So one of the things about Pug, if you don't include your element name or your tag name in the line, like if I just have this dot grid, that's going to be assumed to be a div. So this works exactly the same as this. But I just kind of like to have that little bit of extra explicitness. And then for each of these exercises, there would be like a cell. And let's see what this looks like now. They've kind of combined together. A minimum column width of 9 rem and a gap. So why am I not seeing the gap? Let's see what that does. Okay, let's take a look at this. So each of these, oh, okay, whoops. Once again, I messed up on the indentation, so that has to be like that. And how does this look now? Looking better. So now it's kind of like putting these, if I were to add another one, it's going to put that into the grid. And at a certain point, it's going to start reflowing them onto the next line, I think. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of stuff we could do here to improve this. Like if I do something where it's a really long name that doesn't fit into the title, how's that going to look? Actually looks not too bad. It's a bit odd, but it's not flowing out of the card. It's not flowing off the page. Simple enough. And then if I click edit on one of these, I'm taken to this page where I can manage that. That thing, and I can delete it. Okay, so the one other thing I'm going to do on this page for now is see if we can get a decent looking title here. And really I should be putting all this in a container as well. Let's actually just do that. So if I look at the layout page here, if I do like dot container, I guess I should do div.container. And then everything goes into that. The nav goes into that. The content goes into that. And then, so you can see when I refresh the page there, we actually have some margin. So like this sign out button isn't all the way to the very far right. The max width of the content of our page is now limited. So if I'm viewing this on a really big browser, it's not going to be super spread out feeling. And if I'm viewing it on a smaller browser, it's going to kind of resize itself appropriately, hopefully. Although now I'm like, oh, that's interesting. With a smaller size here, all of the stuff in the nav bar is actually disappearing, I think because it's trying to put it into hamburger menu. But I'm going to worry about that later. Basically, I'm just trying to illustrate some of the stuff that we can do with Bulma here. I don't really know exactly what we want this to look like in the long run. One of the things we do want to do here as well probably is have like a header, a title. So like H1 class title. So here like we have an H1. Let's look at the single exercise, or no, this is good. Here we have an H1, but it looks just like text because of the CSS reset that changed that. It basically got rid of all the default H1 styles. So if now we want to make it actually look like a title again, we need to add that class. And, you know, maybe I'll call this manage exercises. And then, you know, we'll also have something where it's like create a new exercise. And to do that, I mean, we could have another card. Or we could just have kind of like a box. Maybe I'll just do that for now. Make it simple. Div.box. And then in here, we're going to use our form styling to make this look half decent. So like if we look over here at this example, we've got field, and then inside that is a label and then a control. So like this would be div.field, label.label, name, and div.control, and then this goes in there. And then the submit button at the bottom is going to be like this. So we've got like another div.field, and then div.control, and then this goes in there. And the class on this would be button, maybe. What does this look like now? Okay, so, we have this little widget here where you can add a new exercise, and it looks a little better than what we had before. Still looks kind of janky, far from perfect, but better. And here we could put even a little title. Create new exercise. Okay. Oh. Let me check on my stream settings here. How's it looking? Seems pretty good. Okay. So let's take a step back from this page now and from trying to style things. I'm going to add this. So update layout to use some Volma components and add basic styling to the exercises page. Okay. So with that, now we kind of want to, or I kind of want to anyway, take a bit of a break from styling things and switch back to implementing some aspects of this today page. And part of that is we're going to need to start. Let's actually, before I forget, let's just do h1.title here today. And so we're going to want to start introducing the concept of not just an exercise, but of an instance of a user performing an exercise on a particular day. So for that, we're actually going to create a new table. And here I called this exercises table. I'm not a huge fan of that. Let's actually rename this. If I do F2, I can rename this symbol to just exercises. And that's more in keeping with these other tables that were created by whatever it is, better auth. And I kind of like that just because, we don't need to call it a table. You can tell it's a table because of the type. So let's just do this. Rename exercise table to exercise. Also like this. Yeah, so I'm going to make this singular as well. Rename it again. Okie doke. And just out of curiosity, if I then search for this exercises table, is this anywhere in my code? No. Okay, good. Sometimes, like for instance, if I was renaming that, but then it was also mentioned in some other JavaScript file, the rename symbol is not going to detect that that is a usage referencing this variable. And so just checking to make sure that I didn't miss anything with the automatic renaming. And kind of as an example here now, if we look at one of these, oh, see, this is a good example of a problem with that name. So I like this part because it reads now kind of like the SQL, like select from exercise. But what I don't like is that exercise, or even exercises with an S, is like a variable that I'm actually wanting to use in my code. in some other context. So now I kind of need to fix this. Which is almost enough to make me want to not rename it in the first place. So let's not. Let's undo that change. One of the nice things about using Git, if I want to revert that change, I can just undo commit. Oh yeah, well, let's just discard this for now. I can undo this commit, and then I can revert these changes, and we're back to the state we were in before. And I'll just leave it like that, and I'll keep following this pattern for now. So we're going to create a new table, which we'll call sets table. Maybe this will be like exercise sets. Well, let's just call it sets. So this is where we start to get into some data modeling questions. Because if we think long term, there might be, like, say your exercise is something like jogging. Jogging you don't really do in sets per se. You just do it for a certain length of time and more of like a session. And maybe you alternate between jogging and running. And do we want the app to be smart enough to be able to let the user put in like, well, I jogged for 5 minutes and then I ran for 2 minutes and then I jogged for 5 minutes and then I ran for 2 minutes, all in one jogging session? Or does that kind of feel like overkill? And then when it comes to an exercise like, pull-ups, the question becomes, well, if a person is doing a set of pull-ups, like 3 sets of 10 pull-ups, that combination of 3 sets of 10 is kind of like a thing by itself. So do we want to have sets be the main entity that users create, or do we want to have something else, like a group of sets, be the main entity that users create? I'm kind of just trying to think through this in my head a little bit. It feels like there's something else there that we want to create, and I'm not sure what to call it. But for now, let's just start with sets, and we can figure out other things as we go. Okay, so we've got our sets table. It's got the ID and the user. It also is going to need a reference to the exercise that the user is performing for this set. And that's going to be text. Well, I guess that would be an integer exercise ID. And this is referencing exercise table .id. So this is going to create a new table that references both a user and an exercise. Also, kind of as a side note here, because we're referencing an exercise, we could exclude this user part and say, well, the set automatically belongs to the user who also owns the exercise. There's not an ambiguity here, but it does make it a little bit more complicated, because now in order to say, well, does the user have permission to look up a given set, we have to actually also look up the exercise that the set is connected to with a join or something like that in order to be able to assess, well, the user, yes, they do have exercise, or they do have access to this set because they have access to the exercise. Whereas if the user is directly associated with the set, even though it's a little bit redundant, it makes that logic just a little bit clearer and more obvious. Also, in the possible future where we have exercises that are not associated with a particular user, say a global pull-ups exercise that any user can use, those sets are still going to need to be associated with a user even if the exercise is not. So ultimately, having the user associated with each of these different things is nice. Another thing here, we have this on-delete cascade, on-update cascade. So this means if the exercise itself is actually deleted, these sets related to that exercise will be automatically deleted as well. Now, that's something that could potentially cause the user, not realizing it, to delete an exercise and accidentally delete a lot of their historical data. So I'm kind of a mixed feeling about this, but I think that's something we can support on the UI side and in the controller by suggesting that a user doesn't delete an exercise if it has associated sets. But there are cases where the user might want to do that, and so we don't want the database to prevent it from happening. We want to prevent it from happening in our client side or server side logic. So what else do we actually need? Well, we need the number of reps in this set. And I'm just going to go ahead and call that reps. Not null. But some things don't have reps. Like again, the example of jogging. So what would jogging be? Do we want to say that that's still a set? Or do we want to say that that's something else? Let's say that that's still a set. And so if that's still a set, then reps actually becomes optional. Your set might have some reps, or it might have a, let's call it a duration, which would be a date, a time, duration. Is that a thing? No. Interval. I think interval, right? And that's also optional. Let's see what Drizzle has to say about interval here. Interval. Yeah, time span. So this is what we want. So it could be, say, 10 minutes. Now, what you can do is you could have it have a start time and an end time, where it's like, oh, you started at, this timestamp, and then you ended at this timestamp, and then the interval is implicit in the difference between those two timestamps. But a lot of the time, at least for me, if I'm writing an exercise, what I care about is how long the exercise took. And I don't want to have to think about when it started or when it ended, unless the app is going to somehow track that for me automatically, which is way out of scope of what we're actually going to be doing. The user is going to have to input that stuff themselves, and that's kind of annoying. It's easier for them to just be able to say 10 minutes. And you can kind of see in the Postgres docs that this interval type is what we're actually going to end up with in the database. Okay, so let's see here. So the other thing is we have reps, we have duration. Neither of these are required, but it should be required that one or the other of them is specified. So that's like a custom constraint. And I wonder if there's a way to do that in Drizzle, like a check constraint. I'm just kind of reading through this a little bit here and giving it some thought. Don't really need unique. Yeah, let's just try this. So we could say, it looks like that's passed as an option after this object. And these we can import. That's interesting. It doesn't actually come from the default PG. Right. Yeah, okay, okay. And then here, I think I could do an and type of thing. So like we did in that other place, we could do like and. Or so we would say we want to, the constraint is that either one of them are not null, actually. So it wouldn't be an and, it would be an or. Or not null or exists table.reps exists table.sets, or not .sets, .duration. And so this is saying, so what are you complaining about here? Okay, it doesn't like that. Maybe I have to actually use the SQL thing here. SQL tagged literal table dot duration is not null or table dot reps is not null. And this would be something like duration or reps exist. Okay, so I'm kind of curious to see what this migration is going to generate when we run it. But before we do that, let's see if there's anything else that we want to add to this table. So we've got our exercise, we've got our user, we've got our reps and our duration. Oh yeah, we probably want some kind of date. Because we don't have like a starting time, which, you know, as I said, is usually too much granularity, but we still want some kind of date that the actual set happened. And this, you know, thinking ahead, maybe we actually want there to be more of like a session where you could have multiple sessions on a date and then the set is associated with a session. But in the meantime, I'm just going to do date. For now. We can adjust it later. And this is not null. Okay. Yeah, so one of the things I'm thinking about now too is there's potentially an order concern here as well. So suppose the user is creating sets for pull-ups, to use that example again. Their first set, they do 10 reps. Their second set, they do 7 reps. And their third set, they do 5 reps. But if those are all on the same date, then how do we know which one was the first set and which one was the last set? When the user goes back to that page and views their sets for that day, it might show the 5 rep one first, then the 7 rep one, then the 10 rep one, or whatever order, because the order is not really defined here. We could use the ID, the auto incrementing ID, as kind of like a surrogate for the order, but usually it's better to actually have an order number, an explicit column where it's saying this is the order. So you would have like set 1, set 2, and set 3 of a given exercise on a given day. And that is also going to be not null. And we're going to want an index on that order, probably. I'm not going to worry too much about the indexing yet, though. I might end up adding those later. And we could also add a a unique constraint which would be like here. And this would be unique on unique order per day. What are you complaining about? Oh. Import u. And then this would be on table dot user table dot exercise. Or let's not even do exercise. Let's do table dot user table dot day and table dot order. So what this is saying is that we should not allow the creation of two sets with the same user, the same date, and the same order, because then we wouldn't know what order to actually render those in the UI. And just looking back at this syntax here, yeah, seems like it's, what is null not distinct? I don't know, but that doesn't matter because none of these can be null anyway. Okay, so let's go ahead and try creating the, well, let's first get rid of some of these unused imports. And try creating the migration for this. Run migration create. And this would be called add sets table. Oh, what is it called? Migration generate. Okay, so here we have created a new migration. Let's see what it's doing. So it's creating a table, sets, with ID as an integer, user ID, exercise ID, reps, duration, date, order. And then we're adding a constraint on the user ID, which is kind of interesting that we're doing that. We're adding another constraint here. Where are the other, where's these constraints being defined? It seems like they didn't get picked up somehow. pg table sets, there's an object, and then table returns an array. Hmm. I don't see why it's not detecting these. Like, I don't actually have to call it check constraint, right? That wouldn't really make sense. I don't know. The other thing is, what I also don't know is, like, now that I've defined this migration, how do I fix it? Like, I could make just a whole new migration to test out this little change. But I would rather be able to add it to this existing migration that I just created somehow. Let's see what happens if I pass help in here. Doesn't really have much to say about that. Migrate, what about if I just do this? Doesn't have much to say for itself at all. Oh, that can... Migrate. Dialect, Postgres. So what if I do... I'm kind of curious if that's maybe causing the problem. If I do migrate generate again, what do we get from this? No schema change, nothing to migrate. Are you sure about that? Are you sure you're sure about that? Huh. Yeah, I don't really know what's up with that, but for now, I'm just going to run the migration that we did end up with, which does not set these constraints. And we can always add them later once we start to care more, I guess. But basically the point of this is that we've created this sets table now. And then in, for instance, the today view, we would have the ability to add sets to today for given exercises. And this would be add sets table. Note, constraints aren't included in the migration for some reason. Yeah, just seems odd. I don't know why it's like that. Hmm. 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 Okay. In any case, let me do a quick time check here. So we have a little bit of time left. I'm thinking that what I'm going to do is in this today page, I'm going to add a card for adding sets for the day. And I'm going to kind of copy some of this logic from the exercise thing. Log and exercise. Let's just save that, see what that looks like. Okay. And so here, the exercise, this is actually going to be a select. Because we're going to want to give the user the opportunity to choose between a drop down of all of their exercises. And then it would be like each exercise in exercises, option exercise.name, value exercise.id, something like that. And then we need to populate this exercises array. And here's an example where, so we're going to start writing some code that's going to be reused, because now we have two separate routes that are both needing to look up all of the exercises for a given user. I'm actually going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it models. I'm going to make a new file in there. I'm going to call it exercises. And then I'm going to export async function get exercises for user. And then we're going to have a user ID string. Whoops. And I'm just going to put this into there. And then we're going to need to import some of this stuff. And this is the user ID. And we're just going to return this. So then over here, we could say exercises equals await get exercises for user, user.id. And then we can do the same thing in this today route. Oh, and this can be with guaranteed session as well. And then this is going to have exercises passed in. Now let's see what we've got going on here. So if I refresh the page, we have a list of all of the exercises that the user can pick from. So then the user needs to be able to input the number of reps. Let's just start with the number of reps, and then we can deal with the duration element later. And so I'm going to do this like select name equals exercise, so that when the user actually submits the form, that's what it's going to be called. And then I'm going to do another div.field, label.label, reps, div.control, stop doing that, input number, reps, name reps. So let's see what happens when we add this. Click add. So we knew that it's not going to work because we haven't actually updated the action yet. I just want to see what it's sending. So we get a form data payload where the exercise is 6. That's the ID of the exercise. And the reps is 3. And we'll probably also want to pass in a day. We could just say, oh, the day is today, calculate that on the server side. But you could easily imagine the user might in the future want to be able to add exercises on days other than today. So we don't want to shoehorn ourselves into assuming that that's always going to be today. So if I add another, say, input hidden name date value today. And I'm also going to put that as the title here, today. And so this is going to need to be a string with the current day's date. It's going to need to go into here, like so. So what is today? We could do like new date, which is going to return the current date. And then dot get day, get UTC. To date string. Maybe. Let's see what this has to say for itself. So that is what our date string looks like. What I really want is actually more of an ISO date string. Can I do like two, what does that have to say for itself? Don't really like that either. So like this, for instance, works well for the title for the page, but it makes it a little bit more complicated when we're parsing the input field here. Because now if I do this, the input field is going to use that as the date, which then we're going to have to parse back out into a date string. And because it's not in like an ISO format, the actual format of that string is going to vary depending on what locale the user is in. Like if I were to do new date let's see what it has to say for itself if I do this. New date with a string like that. Refresh. 2025, 1, 4. Okay, I mean, it did parse it. So for now, I'm going to say that's tolerable, acceptable. A lot of times when I'm working with dates, I'll want to pull in a date-specific library. Like, I'm a fan of Luxon. Gives you a lot more control and a lot more functionality. But for now, I think this is going to work okay. So now we need to actually add a route for the user to add a rep. So this is going to be like /today /add /set. And that could be post. Or we could even just do like /sets. And so what the user is doing here is they're creating a new set. And what we're going to be doing is parsing some stuff from the body. So const, what do we have here? We have exercise, reps, and date. Exercise, reps, date equals rec.body. And then we're going to do a insert, await db.insert, rep or sets table, values, user.id, exercise, reps, and date. And then this is going to complain because it's difficult to read. User does not exist in type. Does it not? Not sure why it's unhappy with that. Because it has the user, like it literally lists right here, user does not exist in type user string. And I mean the user.id, we know, yeah, I'm not sure why that's giving me an error. Well, either way, we also need an order. And this is kind of where things start to get a little interesting because like, what are we going to use for the order? In order to know that, we actually have to look up all of the other sets that the user has for the given day and put in an appropriate order for them. For now, if we just do one, okay, so that actually fixed the error, which is interesting because that kind of shows that it's, I mean, that error message I think was just a little confusing, but so the order is going to be let's just call it order for now. And we're going to have to actually load that const latest set equals await db dot select dot from sets table dot where and equals sets table dot user dot id. And also it has to be sets table dot date. And so let's look back at our schema here real fast. So the order is expected to be unique for the user and the date. So here we're saying look up all of the other sets with this user and this date. And then we're going to order by order, sets table dot order. And then we're going to limit 1. And this is going to be descending order. Is that right? No? Order by desk. It's interesting. So if I do that, is this now going to give me the... I don't know why it doesn't detect that that can be included here. And then dink, 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 dink. Order. And then we could do dink, dink, order. Or 1. We can start it at 1. So what this is saying is, in order to get the order, we're going to look up all of the sets for this user on this date. And I guess I could just do select sets table dot order. No, select order sets table dot order. So we're going to get the orders. We're going to order by descending. So the higher the order will be first. We're going to limit it to 1. So it's getting the highest order for a given day. And then we're going to return 1 for that. And we're going to put this here. And this is something that, again, this probably could be abstracted into a helper function, especially if we end up finding ourselves reusing it somewhere. But in the meantime, it should work. And so now, if we actually update the today route to send this to /sets method post, and we also want this to then redirect back to today, res.redirect today. Whoops. Today. And we refresh, or no, we go today. Let's see what happens. So kind of the other thing that we'll want though is a list of all of the exercises for today so we can actually see when this does something. So let's just do something simple here. We're going to do another unordered list. And then it's going to be each set in sets set dot ID. Sure. Just want to see if it's going to be adding some sets. And kind of in order to do that, we're actually going to need to have a list of all the sets. And the interesting thing about this here now, we have kind of something to consider. Because if we've decided that we're looking up the sets anyway, do we need to do a separate query to look up the sets for the order, or do we want to parse that out from this list of overall sets? Like if we, we're basically taking out this limit 1, and then, yeah, I think that's about right. And then this would be selecting everything. And then we could actually change this to just be order equals sets The other thing is this order, when we're listing the sets, we're actually going to want this to be in ascending order. So we're going to want to start with 0, then 1, then 2, etc. So this is going to be ask instead of desk. And then when we're getting the order here, we're going to need to do sets dot length -1. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. Oh yeah, so we also need to pass sets through into our template. Now let's see what it looks like. Still another error. Undefined is not an object. Sets. Oh. Right. Got myself a bit confused here. So the problem that I'm seeing is this is actually supposed to be up here, first of all. And then this order, we're actually going to pull from the body. This is going to be another hidden parameter. So here we'll do this. Next set order. What are you complaining about now? I don't know, but we don't need that. We don't need that. I guess that's what it was complaining about. Okay, so then we need to actually pass through that order. The nice thing about doing it this way as well, and this would be called what again? Next set order. And the name would be order. The nice thing about doing it this way is if the user eventually wants to be able to, say, create an exercise in between two other ones, they'll be able to do that without the route, automatically trying to infer the order as being at the end. So this logic of what the order is, in other words, we've taken out of this controller and we've put it into basically the controller that's rendering the page. So now let's refresh the page and see what we've done. If we say 3 or 2, add, hey, it did it. So what did we get here? So exercise 6, reps 2, date, order, and then today we got redirected back and we can see that set right there. And we could even do, well, let's get Table Plus open here. Connect. If we look at the sets, we can see that set we just created it's got the correct date, it's got the order, exercise in the reps, and duration is null. If I create another one here, that one's now been added. And if we look at Table Plus, so we can see that the order isn't working properly. This is getting, the second thing also has the order of 1. This shouldn't even be possible, but because the constraint that we tried to put in our table didn't work, it actually is possible. So why is that not returning the right order? Let's see. Next set order is 1. Oh, because I have to increment this. So basically, let's do it this way, or 0. And then this whole thing will be +1. So the order for the next set should be the order for the previous set +1, or 0 + 1 if there was no previous set. So now the next set order is 2. If I do that, now the next set order is 3. Cool. And so now if we actually look at the database, we can see that the order is being handled correctly. And just to avoid problems when I do successfully add that constraint, hopefully in the future, I'm actually going to delete this row manually so that we don't have any duplicate orders in the mix. Okay, so I think I'm going to pretty much call it there. Obviously, we have a lot to do on this page in terms of rendering these exercises, also allowing people to include a duration and so on, but seems like a good stopping point. Let's go ahead and commit what we have here. So what do we have here? Add the ability to log sets of exercises for today. And that's going to include all of these changes. Let's get rid of that console.log as well, though. And it's going to include adding this model thing and updating the pug template. Okay, let's push these. And we should be good to go. Thanks for watching, y'all. I'll see you next week.